I say this every election cycle, and I'll say it again. The 2024 political field was intense, so don't get left behind in 2025. If you're running for office, the first thing on your to-do list should be securing your name on the web. With a yourname.vote domain from GoDaddy.com, you'll stand out and make your mark. Don't wait. Get yours today.
Sam and I are always talking about being prepared, whether it's hurricanes in Florida, earthquakes in California, flooding in Arizona, or supply chain disruptions.
Exactly, Chuck. When pharmacies shut down, it does not matter how tough you are, you still need access to critical medicine.
That's why we trust Jace Medical. The Jace case comes with 5 life-saving antibiotics and key over-the-counter meds, so you're covered when things get disrupted.
And Jace goes beyond just the Jace case. They also offer first aid kits, daily prescriptions, and long-term nutrition with Jace Pantry. Don't wait for the next hurricane warning or natural disaster. Take control of your health and peace of mind today.
Visit jace.com and use code FUTURE at checkout for $10 off your order. That's FUTURE at JASE.com.
Welcome to a special episode of Breaking Battlegrounds with your host, Chuck Warren. I'm Sam Stone. Also in studio today with us, our very good friend and occasional co-host, Shay Katiri. We are obviously here to talk about the situation in Iran, which continues to develop and change day by day. The brutality of the regime is being reasserted, and people are suffering. American media and global media as a whole has largely been ignoring the issue. They are, for myriad reasons, and we'll get into some of that with our guest today. But as always, I'd like to jump in with our first guest, Roya Hakakian. She is, she is the author of Journey from the Land of No and has a background as an American Persian Jew, which is very unusual. Obviously, I think most Americans probably have never met an American Persian of Jewish ancestry. Roya, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Roya, how many Jews were there in Iran 40, 50 years ago during the Shah?
Over 100,000.
And
now you're only down to probably 8,000. It's a dying community now, which is incredibly devastating.
I can't imagine how lonely that must feel being one of the 8,000 people there now.
Yes, and terrifying, especially after June of this last year, because even though the regime had always spoken a great deal against Israel and Jews and all that, it was only last June that there was actually a face-off between Iran and Israel. So I am quite certain that the community is even more unsettled now in the aftermath of that. And there was a slew of arrests that took place after the war ended, or there was a ceasefire, I should say. Over 30 Jews were rounded up as spies, and many were released, but some are still in prison.
Now, Roya, is the Jewish community in Iran concentrated in one location? Do they have an epicenter, or are they at this point just spread out and they're randomly interspersed throughout the population?
That's an excellent question, primarily because it actually captures the history and sort of the sociology of the Jewish community in Iran. When Jews were at their most comfortable in Iran, you could find them anywhere. They were spread out throughout the country, in small cities, in large cities, everywhere. But as the pressure started to mount more and more, and as the communities started to leave the country more and more, they just dwindled in all the cities where there had been a long history of Jewish presence. And now you have primarily Jews in Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, and in Shiraz, which is where Jews had traditionally been concentrated outside of Tehran. Only 2 cities, and most of them are in Tehran.
I grew up knowing that my grandfather fathers both had close Jewish friends. And the thing about Persian Jews is that, Roya, correct me if I'm wrong, Persian Jews are the oldest Jewish diaspora in the world, and they've been there for 2,500 years. If you run into a Christian in Iran, it's quite obvious that they are Christians because they mostly don't have Persian names, and some of them still, they're so isolated as a community, especially Armenian Christians, who speak...
They're more recent arrivals.
Yes, very recent arrival, and they speak Farsi with an accent. With Jews, you'll never know that someone's a Jew in Iran.
Well, it's their home.
Yeah, it's been their home, and they are so well assimilated. And my mom would always say that, like, one of her friends was named Baharak, which is a very Persian name. Roya has an Iranian name. They were so well assimilated until, and hasn't been always perfect. I mean, it hasn't been good for much of the history to be a Jew rather than a Muslim in Iran. But still, Persian Jews made their mark on Iranian history and became part of Iran, and it is very unfortunate how it looks like now.
Roya, this is Chuck. So how brutal is this crackdown? I mean, Sam and I and Shay have been following, Shay's following more, but I'm on it all the time.
And the news is being suppressed at this point, too. It's unbelievable.
What do your sources tell you? How brutal is this crackdown? What does our audience need to know?
Okay, so I'm on your show as a writer and an expert, but I have to make a confession. I have tears in my eyes, and I'm trying very hard not to break down and cry. And I don't have this emotional reaction only because I was born and raised in Iran. I have this emotional reaction because what happened in Iran in the past 2 weeks is the equivalent of a 9/11 or an October 7th in the history of modern Iran. And the fact that the world hasn't registered the enormous proportions of what took place is as if 9/11 happened and no one cared or no one knew. So which is, by the way, an additional pain in addition to the tragedy that people have experienced. So the news that's trickling out is horrific. It can only be compared to cases of genocide throughout the 20th century. I happen to have read a certain amount about what happened in Rwanda, but in terms of speed and severity and violence with which they carried out the several thousand killings in a span of 3 or 4 days, in my humble estimation, it compares only to what happened in Rwanda. I hear reports of people in Mashhad, which is a large city in Iran, having witnessed the security forces behead teenagers. I hear reports of people saying that the security forces warned the street trash collectors and sweepers not to clean the blood off the ground because they want the blood to be there so people can remember how brutal the crackdown was and make sure that they remain terrified. These are things that even in the 47 years of this regime, which has always been brutal, they have a special place because they are even more so than the regime has ever been. So I'm just baffled, dumbfounded, speechless at the fact that people aren't recognizing the degree to which a serious crime against humanity, to say the least, has occurred in Iran.
I'm going to follow up with 2 questions. First of all, does it baffle you to not see mass protests at college campuses supporting these Iranian revolutionaries? And then 2, what should the United States really do? Does it need to be, in your opinion, this is your opinion only, Should it be a full military onslaught? Should it be what should they do? I don't think Americans want to be bogged down like they were in Iraq at all, but I think a majority of the polling I've seen want these people free. So what is the most logical and efficient thing for the United States to do militarily?
Okay, let me answer your first question first, because that's an easier one to answer.
Right.
We don't see protests on university campuses in America because, for the most part, Iran and a few other actors were funding and supporting those protests,
Right.
instigating them. So, they certainly aren't about to fund and instigate protests against themselves.
Roya, I want to amplify that point really quickly before you move on, because people do not understand that these protests that have been happening, whether around the war in Gaza or any of this stuff, they are far from organic, and they are very much an organized and funded effort of radical Islamist groups, including the Iranian regime, to mobilize these efforts. And they have created an alliance, and it is a suicidal alliance between this sort of radical environmental LGBTQ wing of the left and the Islamist wing of around the world. It is a unbelievably dangerous phenomenon.
I couldn't agree more. I think, there are more complexities to it, but certainly, according to the CIA, according to a lot of other evidence that have emerged, Iran was funding a lot of the unrest that took place on university campuses throughout America. Now, I should also add that I am not here to say that the students did not have the right to protest. They did have the right to protest.
Of course, sure.
But they were being manipulated. And I think 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds are unaware of how, or were unaware at the time, how deeply they were being manipulated. So that said, may I move on?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So Iranian people took to the streets because of their own reasons, because the economy is in shambles. The value of the Iranian rial had fallen drastically, because there are water shortages, because the country has been driven into the ground. And they chose to come out to the streets. I give them agency. This was their decision. However, the moment that the president issued a tweet to say, "We're locked and loaded," the protesters took heart, thinking that there was support and that these brutal killers were going to be retaliated against by the United States. And that's why they showed in greater numbers and were more daring in emerging from their homes and walking throughout the country and protesting. Now, I don't want to make a moral argument that it is for the United States or for Donald Trump to fulfill the promise that he made, that he would support the protesters. There is room for a moral argument to be made, because the thousands and thousands that died, in part died because they were certain that just as America had attacked Iran in June of 2025, it would now, after the president had, in a couple of tweets, told them to go even take over various government institutions, that he would have their back too, because he had done that in the past. Or at least, I should say, he had attacked the nuclear facilities in Iran. But so other people can make that moral argument. The argument that I'd like to make is that if you want to recover at least the financial losses that the United States made in Iraq, make Iran right now. Because the reason Iraq became the quagmire that it became, the reason American efforts in Iraq failed was in great part, not entirely, but in great part, because Iran and Iranian IRGC had infiltrated inside Iraq and was funding all the militia groups that were killing American servicemen in Iraq and just undermining every effort that the United States was making to make a democracy. And Iraq still remains somewhat of a failed state, although it's in better shape than it was 25 years ago because of Iranian influence. Iraqis cannot run their government without the blessing of the Iranian leadership. So here's a chance for the United States right now in January of 2026 to say, we put all that money into this project, not recognizing that there can never be an independent Iraq as long as there is a neighbor next door that's undermining our efforts. And this is our opportunity to make that right. And I think what a fantastic opportunity for Donald Trump to turn around and say, people of America, remember all the money we wasted in Iraq? I can recover that by fixing Iran now. Now, fixing is a loaded word.
That's a lot. Roya, we've got to go to break here in about a minute here, but I want to get one last thought from you. What does a post-regime Iran look like?
Listen, it won't be a Jeffersonian democracy, but it can be better than what it is today. And it can be a country that is on its path to a transition to a secular society, which is what all Iranians for the past 150 years have been striving for.
And Iran is a country with a phenomenal history that really has been hijacked these last few decades. I think all of us would love to see that turn around. Roya Hakakian, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, follow her on X at Roya the Writer. Breaking Battlegrounds will be coming back with more here on our Iran special in just one moment.
I say this every election cycle, and I'll say it again. The 2024 political field was intense. So don't get left behind in 2025. If you're running for office, the first thing on your to-do list should be securing your name on the web. With a yourname.vote domain from GoDaddy.com, you'll stand out and make your mark. Don't wait. Get yours today.
Sam and I are always talking about being prepared, whether it's hurricanes in Florida, earthquakes in California, flooding in Arizona, or supply chain disruptions.
Exactly, Chuck. When pharmacies shut down, it does not matter how tough you are, you still need access to critical medicine.
That's why we trust Jace Medical. The Jace case comes with 5 life-saving antibiotics and key over-the-counter meds, so you're covered when things get disrupted.
And Jace goes beyond just the Jace case. They also offer first aid kits, daily prescriptions, and long-term nutrition with Jace Pantry. Don't wait for the next hurricane warning or natural disaster. Take control of your health and peace of mind today.
Visit jace.com and use code FUTURE at checkout for $10 off your order. That's FUTURE at JASE.com. All
right, welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. Continuing on now with our Iranian special. Our next guest up, Reuel Marc Gerecht, is a former Iranian targets officer in the Central Intelligence Agency, a resident scholar at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, previously a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and director of the Middle East Initiative at the Project for the New American Century. Reuel, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure.
Reuel, so tell our audience what exactly you being a former Iranian targets officer for the CIA entails. What does that job do that you can tell publicly?
Well, I mean, the Directorate of Operations, has different targets. You can have a Russian targets officer. In my case, I overwhelmingly spent my time going after Iranians overseas who might have valuable information and attempting to recruit them and send them back into Iran so they would be spies. Essentially, That's what an Iranian targets officer does in the Central Intelligence Agencies. There's a variety of ways you do that, but in a nutshell, that's what espionage for Iranians is about.
So that being said, what can the United States and Israel do, via clandestine maneuvers, to help facilitate a regime change in Iran right now? Is there anything we can really do?
Well, I think the answer to that's yes, but it takes a while to get those things up and running. And to my knowledge, the agency has never had a regime change program for Iran. That would require, the president and the intelligence committees in the House and the Senate to be of one mind, and to develop that program. It takes a lot of time. You have to expect a lot of mistakes. The Israelis certainly have developed a covert action program on Iran, not aimed at regime change, but at the nuclear and the missile programs. I understand that the Israelis now do have a regime change program in its infant stages at Mossad, but you can't turn this on like a light switch.
Right.
So you have to think about it. You have to start working at it. You have no guarantee of success, and it will be, I guarantee you, frustrating. I did also covert action when I was in the agency on Iran, and it's just needless to say, it's very frustrating. So you can have some successes. You don't really know whether your successes, how significant they might be. I mean, if you look back at the Cold War and you looked at, say, clandestine book and magazine publishing that the agency was involved with in Poland, especially after 1980 and before, at the time, you would not have been able to tell how successful it was. The agency wanted to kill that program in 1980, and it was only saved by Mr. Brzezinski. Later, we know that program was quite important. So all these things can only be assessed in retrospect. You can't do it lifetime.
Well, given that this is a kind of a slow build process, and it is going to be, regardless of how anybody goes about it, really difficult to remove this regime, what can the United States be doing right now to support the Iranian people and help protect this movement until those kind of aims could be achieved, if that's what they decide to do?
Well, I mean, on a small scale, not talking about the use of the U.S. military, on a small scale, you could get the U.S. government more aggressively involved in having secure communication devices. You could get them involved with more aggressively using our cyber capacities to thwart the regime's communications. There are a lot of little things you can do along the edges. Now, we have a significant problem in that the Iranian opposition is quite large, but it's leaderless. So, and the regime is excellent at finding individuals who have charisma and neutralizing them. Again, that can't be understated, and it's overstated in its importance, because you need to have someone to work with, and so you would have to go through the process of finding and developing folks who could then develop networks on their own inside of the country.
Well, and that makes what our previous guest was talking about, the fact that they have in the last few days eliminated several thousand people, even more nefarious, because what you're saying is those eliminations have targeted and probably very effectively removed a lot of the people who could have furthered this movement.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. So, these things have to be redundant. You have to plan that folks can be eliminated, and that there will be other folks who can come in and replace them, ideally. But certainly, the regime, I suspect, has taken a very shotgun approach to eliminating individuals who could be threatening. So certainly anyone who has demonstrated any type of leadership in street protests probably has been taken out of the equation. And that matters. I mean, it takes time to recover from those. Now, I think it's fair to say that given how abstract, not abstract, but how amorphous the Iranian opposition is, how widespread it is, it makes it very difficult for the regime to eliminate it by eliminating, individuals who have shown potential, who have been charismatic out on the streets, because it can pop up again. And this has been the history of the Islamic Republic since the first major protests in 1989. The regime knows it's got a massive level of dissent. There were very interesting leaked recordings of the security services coming together, for example, after they crushed the pro-democracy Green movement in 2009. If you listen to those tapes, it's quite clear that the regime's security services know how much the people hate them. So that's to their advantage.
Right.
They're not deluded in realizing how widespread the opposition and animus is.
So in 2009, you had the Green Revolution. What should we learn from how President Obama dealt with that, or reacted or didn't react to it, and what should Trump take from those lessons and implement today to support these people who want their country back?
Well, that's a good question. I think Obama himself realized later that his approach, which was essentially to ignore the pro-democracy movements and the massive demonstrations in Tehran, and to reach out to Khamenei to try to establish a nuclear deal, in retrospect, didn't accomplish much. And there is always something to be said for the President of the United States using the bully pulpit. It matters. Now, the President Trump has got himself into a bit of a pickle, to say the least, by promising the Iranians that the United States, the cavalry, was coming. And then President Trump so far hasn't delivered. And if he does deliver, it's obviously going to be a little bit late, I suspect. That essentially replicated Obama's red line on the use of poison gas in Syria, where he said the United States would not tolerate that. And in fact, in the end, we ended up tolerating it. And the repercussions of his failure there were not insignificant.
One of the things to consider about Obama red line is a year later, Russia goes and annexes Crimea. 2 years later,
when you don't stand on red lines,
Xi Jinping goes through his face lies about militarization of the Spratly Islands in South China Sea because he lost all his credibility, and President Trump risks losing that himself if he doesn't enforce it. And as for Iran goes, I talked to Iranians inside for the past many years. 2009, they come out, nothing happens. They don't come out again until 2017 when Obama is gone, first year of Trump in office. Nothing happens again. They say, well, Trump was new. 2019, they come out, they say, well, he was distracted by impeachment. 2022 come out, okay, Democrats are not going to help us. If we don't do anything, it will be proven to them that there's a bipartisan consensus not to do anything in Iran, and they might not come out for a generation again.
Well, let's say that the United States did take direct action. Qatar has already said that they will not allow the use of our base there for direct attacks. What are the strategic implications for our relations with the other nations throughout the Gulf?
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that certainly on the surface, all of the Arab sheikdoms will be opposed to it. Now, and I suspect this instance probably even privately. In the past, it's quite typical, particularly for the Saudis, for them to say one thing publicly and do another thing privately. I suspect here, MBS, who's tried to reestablish a certain relationship with Iran, is consumed by his extremely expensive internal development projects. Doesn't want any type of instability and convulsion. And without a doubt, if the clerical regime were to fall, that's quite a bit of instability that would come to the region, and worse in his case, if that led to some type of democracy in Iran. That doesn't play well, obviously, with Saudi Arabia. So, I'm not surprised at all. MBS, who started out being quite anti-Iranian, in coming to the United States and even privately being even more scorching, and wanted to do a lot of things to cripple the regime, has sort of reversed course. Now, I would say that's standard Saudi practice. But no, I mean, if the president of the United States decides to finally go after the Iran security forces, I don't expect us to have any significant support from any of the Gulf states. I think they'll just sit this one out.
So let me
criticize us publicly.
Yeah, yeah. What would it look like if Trump decided to go after the Iranian security forces? What would they do?
That's an excellent question, since the security forces are, off base now. If they go back to base, then you could obviously hit them when they're in their bases. And I suspect, I know for a fact that the Israelis gave the Americans about 2 weeks ago their targeting information that they were going to use on the 12th and 13th, what would have been the 13th day of the war back in June, where they were going to shift and start targeting the internal coercive apparatus. The Israelis, when they struck during the 12-day war, they did little damage, didn't really target the regime's capacity to maintain internal security. They were going after the missile programs, the nuke programs, and other things related to essentially the capacity of the regime to operate abroad. So that targeting list has been given to the Americans. I don't know where it is now. Obviously, you could go after a lot of different facilities. You could go after the regime's ability to communicate with itself. You can go after the communications, the radios, the televisions, et cetera, et cetera. So there are things you can target. At this time, it's difficult to say what the repercussions of that would be.
Right.
I don't think there's anything the Americans could do that could hurt the Iranians in opposition. It's just not at all clear what the gains would be.
Reuel, I have a question for you. I've heard a lot of people who say that cyber attacks are more important than kinetic attacks, and my worry is that Iranian opposition needs to see something blow up to believe help is coming. What's your assessment? Do you think that kinetic attack is just, as far as messaging goes, is necessary, or do you think cyber might suffice?
I think the discussion of cyber, and I don't want to belittle it, but the discussion of cyber often comes under the same rubric as sanctions, and that is, you do that when you don't want to do the military kinetic attacks. It's a way of dodging the issue. So, is it important to go after the regime's cyber capacity? Is it important to disrupt their communications? Is it important to play naughty and do what I think was done just the other day, take over their TV broadcasting? Yes, absolutely, do it. I don't think it's a substitute for military power and for demonstrating quite clearly that the United States is intervening. I mean, that's why when Mr. Trump made his statement, it was a bit shocking, because no one's ever accused Donald Trump of being sort of a liberal hegemonist.
Right.
So his intention to intervene to protect Iranians in the streets was quite something. It was a momentous statement. It just hasn't had, as of yet, much follow through.
Should they intervene and create a regime change situation in Iran? I've asked our previous guest also, what does that outcome look like in the near term and hopefully in the long term?
You mean if the United States were to intervene?
Yeah, if the United States were to take military action how does that get settled? Because obviously we've had the experience, which I think Americans are very wary of being in Iraq for 20 years trying to stabilize a government that never seemed to quite get there.
Yeah, though I would notice on Iraq, I think it just had its sixth election.
Right.
So, yeah, one perhaps needs to take the long view on Iraq.
That it's getting there, and we're just not paying attention anymore.
Yeah, it gets there. It's just that the results that are there by Middle Eastern standards, I think, are fairly successful. By American standards, they're unappealing.
We are not known as a patient people here in America, are we?
Yeah, I mean, the Americans, I think, are more patient than they give themselves credit. I mean,
but we want it done quick, and my patience isn't good. I mean, go ahead. That's final.
I want my Big Mac fries and a Reza Pahlavi kingship tomorrow, please.
Oh, my.
No, I mean, we do like our results quicker as opposed to longer.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult to prognosticate on these things.
Sure.
Because you don't know what the reaction's going to be. All I know is that the regime is certainly using rhetoric that reveals greater confidence. And it should be, because it's justified. I mean, the regime was reeling after the 12-day war. You could begin to detect, I wouldn't say, wide differences of opinion amongst the ruling elite, but there were disparate voices. There was certainly a great deal of concern about the regime's future. Once again, they have proven that they can crush the individuals on the streets. And the United States said it was coming to the rescue, and it didn't. So that makes the regime certainly more confident.
Yes.
Now the regime is still in a bad state, no question about it. And it knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that permanent instability is its lot. I think the Americans should, accentuate that feeling of instability. But it does mean the United States does have to commit. There is no short answer to this. Now, I would say the United States has effectively been in a Cold War with the Islamic Republic since the revolution. And I would also argue that, the Islamic Republic theocracy has been responsible for maiming and killing hundreds of Americans over the years.
100%.
And there's never been any condign punishment for that. And that's been a serious error on both Republican and Democratic presidents.
Yes. So I'm going to ask a final question here, and I guess it's more directed to people who don't want America to be the cop in the world. What does it mean if we have regime change in Iran for peace in the Middle East and just regarding national security for the United States? You mentioned a little bit the number of Americans who have been killed or targeted, but what does that actually mean? Can you give us a picture so people understand why regime change is important for America's interest?
Well, I mean, the Islamic Republic has been a pillar of virulent anti-American ideology in the region since the revolution. It has engaged in numerous nefarious activities. It's been a primary backer of a lot of terrorist groups. It sees itself as the great barrier against the United States in the region. It sees itself as the avatar of Islamic militancy. So if the theocracy, the Islamic Revolution in 1979 fundamentally reorganized the mindset of the region. I suspect if the Islamic Republic collapses, even if you don't see a democracy arise, it nevertheless will show clearly that theocracy has failed, that its version of Islamic militancy has been rejected by the people themselves. That is a huge effect, I would argue, on the mindset throughout the Muslim world. So and if a democracy were to arise, the ripple effect of that would be substantial. Now, there are a lot of regimes in the Middle East that would not like that. First and foremost, the Saudis. And I will never forget going to a conference once in the Gulf, and I was surrounded by a lot of the royals of the various sheikdoms, and they were all talking about how democracy was such a terrible idea, that the only thing that could possibly handle the region was rule by them. Now, that's not atypical for authoritarians. They are the saviors of their own domain.
Very few kings have ever wanted to hand over their crown. Reuel, I want to thank you. We very much appreciate having you on the program. We're going to have you back again, but folks, make sure you're following the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and following all the great work that's happening there, because this is going to be an ongoing story, and I think a lot of folks need to be tuning into it who aren't tuned in yet. So Breaking Battlegrounds will be coming back with more here in just one moment.
I say this every election cycle, and I'll say it again. The 2024 political field was intense, so don't get left behind in 2025. If you're running for office, the first thing on your to-do list should be securing your name on the web. With a yourname.vote domain from GoDaddy.com, you'll stand out and make your mark. Don't wait. Get yours today.
Sam and I are always talking about being prepared, whether it's hurricanes in Florida, earthquakes in California, flooding in Arizona, or supply chain disruptions.
Exactly, Chuck. When pharmacies shut down, it does not matter how tough you are, you still need access to critical medicine.
That's why we trust Jace Medical. The Jace case comes with 5 life-saving antibiotics and key over-the-counter meds, so you're covered when things get disrupted.
And Jace goes beyond just the Jace case. They also offer first aid kits, daily prescriptions, and long-term nutrition with Jace Pantry. Don't wait for the next hurricane warning or natural disaster. Take control of your health and peace of mind today.
Visit jace.com and use code FUTURE at checkout for $10 off your order. That's FUTURE at JASE.com.
Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. Our last guest up for this Iran special program, Behnam Ben Taleblu, is a senior director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Iran program, where he oversees the breadth and depth of FDD's work on Iran, in addition to serving as a senior fellow specializing in Iranian security and political issues. Behnam Taleblu, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let me start off with a fastball right down the middle of the plate. What can the U.S. military do to really support these protesters and enact regime change?
Well, it depends a great deal if that is the goal of the U.S. military, which excels, no doubt, in doing really anything you ask of it. The question for the president is, as he seems to be changing his rhetoric but still growing the military hardware in the region to give him leverage, if not only military options, there's lots of styles of deterrence by punishment and intervention available for him. He could engage in what I think he should not, which is a symbolic strike on some this far-off military facilities. He could continue or pick up where the 12-day war left off by going after the nuclear and the missile installations. But if what you said, which is, I think, the correct approach, which is to help drive the next round of protests, to help put wind beneath the wings of current Iranian protesters, and to actually connect the dots on the threats that emanate against us and our partners and our allies in the Middle East, which is the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran in its entirety, then he will have to engage in a little bit more nuanced targeting. And again, if the president chooses to do this, if he wants to drive the next round of protests, given the violence from the state against the street, he is going to have to hit something big. I mean, something big and politically. That's why some people are talking about potentially going against the supreme leader of Iran's office, as well as against the state broadcaster IRIB. These are two potent symbols of the regime, as well as, of course, if you're trying to help the protesters, striking a far-off missile or nuclear facility is not going to stop the apparatus for repression from going against any protester who is being beaten by the Basij or the IRGC in an urban center. So there will have to be, kinetic targeting of these bases, these recruitment centers, these training centers for Iran's layered security forces. Again, if the president is going to be trying to drive the next round of protests or trying to engage in meaningful deterrence by punishment against the regime for the massive violent crackdown that has already ensued. So political and military targeting is going to have to be fused together.
How difficult, or how much more difficult is the situation for the United States militarily if President Trump does decide to intervene because of the Qatar has already said they're not going to allow the use of their base. Our prior guest, your colleague Reuel Gerecht, was talking about the difficulty of having the other Gulf states, essentially not wanting any involvement, both publicly or privately, with this. How much does that complicate our task militarily?
It significantly does complicate it, but I would also say, we still have been leasing the base there for many years. I don't think the Qataris should be exercising a veto, so we should not be giving the Qataris the ability to exercise a veto and then wield this against us as a precedent. But make no mistake, all of the more traditional American partners on the Arab side of the Persian Gulf have been afraid of the kinetic blowback. And I do think if the strike is meaningful, that there really is a chance for kinetic blowback on their territory. So we have to be brutally honest about that. And that's something that, potential more military assets in the region can help offset, which may be exactly what the president is doing, taking into account regional considerations, concerns, and then surging in more assets to be able to offset those considerations and concerns.
Ben, Amish, there is a lot of that worry, I understand, but also Qatar has an interesting relationship with Iran. They probably are the two states in the Middle East who have the most overlapping interests. How much of it is a political consideration to preserve the regime?
I actually think, more broadly, if there's one real state in the region that is, potentially more afraid of regime collapse, I know sometimes we talk about together the potential for some of the more classic American partners, again, the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, to retain their energy monopoly, to retain their defense priorities, to retain their deep political ties with Washington. Sometimes we do talk, sometimes fast and loose, about ultimately some of these states may not seek or may not like or may not benefit from regime change. But actually Qatar's partner, in my view, Turkey, actually stands to have the most to lose, and I think has perhaps been the most vocal about avoiding regime collapse or implosion, A, because of the political fears, and B, because of some of those same exact overlapping interests about not wanting to have the ire of Israel in the West now focused on an increasingly different brand of jihadism in the Middle East, which is of the Sunni flavor.
What should, here's a question I'm wondering. So I keep seeing tweets and encouragement from the Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, okay? What should he be doing? Is there more he can be doing besides doing these social media posts? How can he be helping these protesters?
Well, I think he's been helping the protesters immensely by really, A, staying in the fight. The challenge is, what can the West do to amplify what is increasingly looking like the most popular opposition figure with respect to both the diaspora and perhaps more importantly, with respect to the street in Iran? I mean, there's a straight line through his grandfather's name being chanted in the holy city of Mashhad in December 2017 to his name and long live the king being chanted in the birthplace of the founding father of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini, in January 2026. There are some in the West who seem to have an allergy to his last name. His name, in my view at least, is not, nor should it be, synonymous with monarchy. It is synonymous with the ideology that is 180 degrees opposite the ideology of the regime today, which is the regime today is Islamist, this is nationalist. It would behoove, I think, every secular, democratic, liberal Western politician to actually help to amplify those talking points, to actually help to amplify the Crown Prince's standing, to actually do things that he has been calling for, which is, if you're in a European jurisdiction, to proscribe the IRGC, to shutter the embassies, to make sure that politically this campaign that he's been running for a very long time, both in real life and on social media, is actually able to be implemented from states who have the levers of power in their hand rather than appeasing the Ayatollahs. So step number one, no own goals, no more mistakes. The very good, very recent news, I should say, that your listeners might be happy about is that the Davos World Economic Forum has just uninvited the Iranian foreign minister, which actually builds on the recent uninvitation of the Iranian foreign minister from the Munich Security Conference. We saw this kind of play during the Women Life Freedom movement, where instead those organizations, I believe it was just Munich, chose to invite the Crown Prince and a whole host of other opposition figures. I would say now is the time to take a page from that playbook and, again, amplify and meet these individuals and make sure that the Islamic Republic knows that the West is beginning to rally around the alternative that the Iranian people seem to have already found. Again, not an endorsement of monarchy or republic or any of these ridiculous debates that domestically or the diaspora seems to have, but potentially looking for the best bridge to the post-Islamic Republic future with the best ideology that can be wielded with against the ideology of the governing state of Iran.
Though it is worth pointing out that they use the very passive language of civilian deaths without saying who killed them, but we'll take it.
Behnam, one other question I have here is, it seems like probably what happened in Venezuela gave some impetus to this movement in Iran. But that also is sort of an unfortunate bit of timing in that the U.S. now has
Greenland.
Yeah, Greenland, but also now we have Venezuela. We have all these situations around the globe that are stretching capacity. How much is our engagement there limiting our ability to engage with Iran in the way we probably need to?
You're hitting the nail right on the head here, because I think no one more than Iranians themselves understand that this is about limited time, limited assets, limited political attention, which is why when Venezuela kicked off, the very unfortunate, dark kind of joke you would hear emanating out of Iran was the exact fear that you heard emanating in the summer of 2009, which is when you had the Green Movement protests at its height, 3 million people in Tehran chanting, saying "Sukut, Sukut," silence, silence. And in the West, unfortunately, later that month or later that summer, Michael Jackson had died. And, this totally took the media reporting and the political attention off of this major, important street protest. And the joke in Iran became that the Basij had killed Michael Jackson, that the paramilitaries had killed Michael Jackson to be able to drown out the media reporting. And with respect to Venezuela, you're right, certainly in terms of military assets and the preferencing of the Western Hemisphere. But now when it comes to Greenland, for example, I recently shared this on social media. Some Iranian friends had sent it to me, but you basically have a whole host of Iranians abroad tweeting and talking about Greenland, because there's a small town in Iran's northeast called Sabzavar, which literally means Greenland. And, Iranians are joking to President Trump, saying, come take Sabzavar, come take this Greenland, in a bid to simply keep Iran in the news. So there is a reason why the Islamic Republic has engaged in a almost 2-week-long, or 12-plus days, in an almost 2-week-long internet blackout, which is to prevent the images and the videos and the facts that would have clearly been in violation of his own red line from getting out and reaching him and saturating the media environment. So I think that's why it's incumbent on every reporter, every radio station, every news station to be able to keep this stuff out there. So kudos to you guys for this segment and keeping it out there.
Well, we wish more would do it. We've been following this with great fascination. I was a young man when Iran disposed of the Shah, and I've always remembered those pictures, and I hurt for the people of Iran what they've been under. It's just been incredible.
Indeed, it's been a nightmare, really.
How different, as we wrap up here, we got about 2 minutes left. I want to throw one final question out at you. How different would the Middle East and the world look with the regime gone and somebody like Pahlavi, or a movement towards a more secular Iran underway? How much would that change global dynamics?
Oh, my goodness, it would be a game changer. Let me just begin by saying, yes, I'm an Iranian American, but I do care first and foremost about American national interests. And here I'm reminded of the line that many ascribe to Henry Kissinger, which is, foreign policy is not missionary work. I actually think to be able to do the things the average American for at least 4 generations at least 4 rounds of major nationwide elections, at least at the presidential level, has been trying to do, which is to actually be able to right size in the Middle East. You can't do that with the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism being in the Middle East, sucking you back in directly or indirectly into conflict or cycle of violence after cycle of violence. So whether your priority is East Asia, rebalancing the pivot and deterring the CCP from going against Taiwan, or to really lock down the Western Hemisphere, you need the time, you need the assets, and you need the Middle East security architecture to favor the West. And that only begins by putting out the arsonist rather than all the little fires caused by the arsonist. So an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure, in my view.
I work with a group that's one of the people I work with is a former CIA officer and so forth for 30 years. He now consults Hollywood on films. And he said the one problem Americans don't realize is that they may not think it, but the U.S. still plays by rules, even in the world of spying. We play with one hand behind our back, whereas the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, they don't put any prohibitions what they do. They just do what they do.
That's damning of truth.
Yeah. I mean, he was. This wasn't some radical guy. He just says it's like he goes. We don't put agents or assets inside a church. We don't say they're priests. We don't say they're care workers. He goes, that's just not what the United States do. But our enemies do not play by those rules, and it's always going to be a problem for America. And
let me just footnote this because there has been imagery coming out of, because this is critical what you just said. There has been imagery coming out amid this most recent round of protests as to several mosques being burned in Iran by dissidents, dissenters, demonstrators. And yes, while the society has fastly moved against not just Islamism and political Islam, but forced state religion in general, one reason why Iranians are so wary of what's going on in some mosques, besides this ideological issue, is because mosques in Iran are also major recruitment centers and sign-up centers and gathering centers for the Basij, the all-volunteer paramilitary. So you see how the regime has taken the inviolability of holy places and already from the get-go abused it. And you excellently said we are handicapping ourselves. We play by rules, this sort of gentleman's game, particularly on the high side, which I can't comment on, but on the high side, where your friend and colleague commented on, where the other side simply does not respect those rules of the road.
That is a ongoing problem that the U.S., I think, just has to get over our squeamishness of. The world operates by real politics.
Yeah, but then they have hearing. I mean, that's the whole point. Then we go and say, why'd you do this? I mean, it's a damn if you do, damn if you don't thing, and that's the beauty of America. We like to still think we have certain rules, but I'm not sure there's rules to be played in this. People are being butchered.
I'm not sure we're not entering a time in geopolitics when the rules matter a lot less than the outcome. That's just my take.
I would say there's a principle at stake as well, and I think this is it might sound like a reverse of a tautology, but the principle should be defended. But it's better to respect the principle in part rather than forsake it altogether.
Right.
And in places where it is forsaken altogether, so long as Uncle Sam is not the one forsaking it, so long as we're not the one driving the train, if we're responding or catching up to something, I think Americans who are eminently reasonable and rational and still largely God-fearing people would understand that.
Yeah, 100%. Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate having you. Appreciate all of our guests. Folks, follow him on X at @TheRealBehnamBT. Breaking Battlegrounds will be back on the air, obviously, this weekend. But folks, share this show around. This is not getting the coverage it needs. The issue throughout Iran is going to affect the entire future of the world. Your children and grandchildren will have repercussions from what happens there over the next few weeks and months. Thank you once again for joining us. We're going to be coming right back with a quick wrap-up, and we'll see you next Friday.
I say this every election cycle, and I'll say it again. The 2024 political field was intense, so don't get left behind in 2025. If you're running for office, the first thing on your to-do list should be securing your name on the web. With a yourname.vote domain from GoDaddy.com, you'll stand out and make your mark. Don't wait. Get yours today.
Sam and I are always talking about being prepared, whether it's hurricanes in Florida, earthquakes in California, flooding in Arizona, or supply chain disruptions.
Exactly, Chuck. When pharmacies shut down, it does not matter how tough you are, you still need access to critical medicine.
That's why we trust Jace Medical. The Jace case comes with 5 life-saving antibiotics and key over-the-counter meds, so you're covered when things get disrupted.
And Jace goes beyond just the Jace case. They also offer first aid kits, daily prescriptions, and long-term nutrition with Jace Pantry. Don't wait for the next hurricane warning or natural disaster. Take control of your health and peace of mind today.
Visit jace.com and use code FUTURE at checkout for $10 off your order. That's FUTURE at JASE.com.
Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. Wrapping up our Iran special. Thank you, Shay, for taking the time to help us put this lineup together today, but also to be here with us. This obviously is a very personal issue for you.
It's difficult because some people have told me you should be feeling terrible, and on the one hand, I am. On the other hand,
you're also an American now.
Yeah. I mean, not a citizen yet, but we're working on it. But by my heart, I always say that I have Lincoln and the U.S. Constitution hanging on my wall.
For people who don't know him, Shay is top 10 constitutionalists among the people I know. And I mean that like the non-sovereign citizen version of constitutionalists, folks. Let's not get crazy here.
I appreciate it. But on the other hand, it's a country I grew up in. I have friends and family. I worry about their safety, but also there's something about it.
How old were you when you came here?
24. I left when I was 22. I lived in Europe and then realized that I realized there's no such thing as European dream. There's an American dream. I'm living it.
Where did you live in Europe?
Budapest, but I traveled across. And one thing that was very interesting to me was I had cousins who had grown up in Europe or were born and raised, all had very nice, bougie jobs, doctors and dentists, because all Persians are dentists. And
I didn't know that. So, so the Indians own the 7-Elevens and you guys are doing their teeth.
Correct.
Okay.
So I realized that they were not totally part of the societies they are in, even though perfect Italian or German accents.
No.
Nicer. And I come here, I still have an accent, and I work in politics, I comment on politics, and I get a lot of hate messages that you stupid this, stupid that, more. Nobody ever says, why is an Iranian talking about U.S. politics?
No, because we can allow any stupid person to talk here.
Yes.
So there's over 4...
Quite often we elect them.
Yeah, double 2 minutes. So the Iranian diaspora is over 4 million people, mostly United States, Germany, UK, Canada, in here. What percentage of them, as we wrap up here, do you think are hanging on the news and Twitter to find out what's going on in Iran? Or I have a friend who was married to a Persian woman. They're from Iran. Her family's here in Newport Beach area and in Germany. They have no family. They just don't really. I mean, they're sad about it, but it's not like people who are our first guests who's in tears about it, right?
Everybody, to some extent, following this. Some much closer, some less so. I have a friend who was just at a Persian Jewish wedding, actually, in Long Island, and everybody was talking about that at the wedding, about what's going on. The diaspora is generally more involved than most other diasporas. The only comparison I have really is one Syrian diaspora during the Civil War and one Jewish diaspora when it comes to Israel. Generally more active, but interesting thing is Iranians have traditionally been Democrats in the United States. Over the past 10 years, they have been moving a lot to the right. A lot of Iranian Republicans. I was the lonely Republican among Iranians. Now everybody's right to me.
Well, then you can count on them becoming 80% Republican if Trump actually
it does something.
Well, same thing in Venezuela. I mean,
which we will see. Obviously, we're going to be following up with more on this topic.
And just really quickly on becoming more Republican, you also risk. Iranians are not that large a community, but they're a very wealthy community.
Yes,
and it's like a Jewish population, which is small but huge donor population. you also risk losing them if Trump doesn't do anything.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
Folks, we hope you enjoyed our special edition on Iran. On behalf of Shay, Jeremy, Sam, and myself, we hope you have a great week. Follow us at breakingbattlegrounds.vote. Follow us on Substack or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great week.